If you zoom out far enough in history, you start noticing a pattern that feels uncomfortable. Power rises in one place and pressure appears somewhere else. Big nations grow and smaller ones become the cost of that growth. This is not new. It did not start in the modern era. It did not start with the United States, Europe, or even colonialism. It goes back to the very first empires. In ancient times, power was simple. If you wanted to survive, you expanded. The Assyrian Empire did it by terror. The Persian Empire did it through control and administration. Rome did it through war, alliances, and absorption. Rome is a perfect example. It rarely called what it was doing exploitation. Rome said it was bringing order, roads, civilization, and law. But behind that language was a system that drained conquered regions of grain, gold, soldiers, and labor to fuel the center of the empire. Gaul fed Rome, Egypt fed Rome. The provinces paid the price so the capital could flourish. And when provinces resisted, Rome responded with force, then rewrote the story as peace restored. This pattern repeated everywhere. Empires needed resources they did not have, so they looked outward. They needed manpower, so they absorbed populations. They needed stability, so they crushed instability wherever it appeared. Sometimes it came through war, other times through alliances that were never equal. Fast forward a few centuries, and the same logic appears again, only with new names. During the age of exploration and colonization, European powers reached across the world. Spain, Portugal, Britain, France, Belgium, and others claimed they were spreading faith, trade, and progress. What they actually extracted was land, minerals, crops, and people. Africa, the Americas, and large parts of Asia were reshaped not for their own development, but to feed foreign economies. Sugar plantations in the Caribbean, gold from West Africa, rubber from the Congo, spices from Southeast Asia. Colonies existed to support the empire, not themselves. Local systems were dismantled, borders were drawn without regard for culture or history, and when independence finally came, the damage was already built into the structure of these nations. What is important here is not just what happened, but how it was justified. Colonial powers said they were civilizing, they said they were modernizing, they said they were bringing order to chaos. The language always sounded noble. The results were always uneven. Then came the 20th century, and the world told itself a new story. Empires fell, colonies gained independence, and we were supposed to be entering a fairer global system. But the methods changed faster than the motives. After World War II, direct conquest became unpopular. So power shifted to influence, economic pressure replaced armies, sanctions replaced invasions, political interference replaced colonial governors. The Cold War is where this became obvious. The United States and the Soviet Union did not just compete with each other, they competed through smaller nations, Korea, Vietnam, Afghanistan, Latin America. These countries became battlegrounds not because they chose to, but because they were strategically useful. If you controlled them, you gained influence, resources, or position. Sometimes this came through war, sometimes through coups, sometimes through funding one side of a civil conflict. Again, the language mattered. Intervention, containment, defense of freedom, national security, different words. Same logic. Now bring this into the present. Look at Crimea and Ukraine. Crimea is not just land, it is access to warm water ports, access to strategic military positioning, access to influence in Eastern Europe. Russia did not describe its actions as expansion, it described them as protection. Protection of ethnic Russians, protection of security interests. Ukraine itself sits at the center of a larger struggle between spheres of influence, East or West, NATO or Russia, alignment or resistance. The people living there pay the price for that struggle. Now look at Venezuela. Venezuela holds one of the largest oil reserves in the world. That alone makes it strategically important. When its economy collapsed and political instability followed, outside interest intensified, sanctions were applied, diplomatic pressure increased, leadership legitimacy became a global debate. Some framed this as support for democracy, others saw it as economic warfare, but the underlying reality remains. A smaller nation rich in resources becomes a focal point for larger powers. This is not unique to Venezuela, it happens across Africa, the Middle East, and parts of Asia. Lithium, oil, rare earth minerals, trade routes, military positioning. The resources may change, but the incentive stays the same. Here is where the pattern becomes unsettling. Big countries do not always need to invade physically anymore. They can weaken a nation economically, they can isolate it financially, they can influence leadership, they can shape narratives, and when instability follows, they point to the chaos as justification. It becomes a self-fulfilling loop: destabilize, intervene, extract, move on. Then history moves forward and the story resets. Ancient empires fell, but the behavior survived. Colonial powers retreated, but the structure remained. Modern superpowers speak the language of law and order, but the outcomes still favor the center. This does not mean every action by a powerful country is evil. It does not mean smaller nations have no agency. History is complex, but patterns matter. When you see the same behavior repeated across thousands of years, across cultures, across political systems, you have to ask why. Is this simply human nature scaled up to nations? Is power incapable of existing without taking from somewhere else? Or have we built a global system that rewards exploitation even when we pretend it does not? Here's the hardest question. If history keeps repeating itself, not in events but in behavior, then maybe the real issue is not who holds power, but how power works. And if that is true, then the cycle does not end with one empire falling or another rising. It ends only when the rules change. So the question is not why big countries use smaller ones. The real question is whether humanity is capable of building power without sacrifice. And looking at history, ancient to modern, the answer is still very unclear.